Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to the almost famous sideshow known as Bigfoot Geography, where we explore the different reaches of this planet that we call Earth and the phenomenon known as Bigfoot. And today, coming with me along on this journey into the southern coasts of Alaska is Kazari Iwakura and Kaiden Arelin. How are you guys doing today?
I'm doing great.
Doing all right.
So we've been in Portlock for about a week now. It's a little goofy in here. Something keeps stealing the food. It might be me.
Well, I think it was Caden when he climbed over the edge of the boat.
Damn.
Hey, yeah, sure. Blame the fat man. Oh, the food's going missing. I guess the fat man did it. Jeez.
Not even looking at the stone.
There's a new cryptid in Portlock. The Fat Man.
The KOR.
Yeah.
Alright, so it's just about time we got around to the region that we're camped out in. Southern Alaska here. So, going into the whole geography of the region, this is definitely the locale that you see on all the Alaska postcards. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
the cruise, all that, like, information,
Absolutely.
all that kind of stuff. Like, this is the untouched, veritable wilderness areas that you see all over that kind of media. And it does not disappoint in terms of wildlife, natural inlets, both predators, carnivores, omnivores, herbivores, all that kind of good shit, right?
Yeah.
So, people have had reports of Bigfoot for a very long time in this area, to the point wherein we actually can trace the origins of the word Sasquatch back to Native Americans in this region. I think it's the Coast Salish tribe. I'm calling them Saskets. So, the culture for it is rife up in here just the same. Now, like, I do want to kind of get into that. The area that we're talking about here stretches from basically from the Aleutian Islands all the way down into British Columbia, and then it's encompassing the city's capital, and we're also talking about the Bering Land Bridge National Park a little bit.
Yes.
So, with that being said, this is also a part of the United States that gets crap loads of salmon every single year. There's plenty of lynx in the area. I think it's the only big cat in Alaska is actually the lynx. There's brown bears and black bears in this part of the United States, and both of them are much bigger than what you get down here, but the brown bear is actually the king when it comes to size, outside of the polar bear, obviously. But there's a lot of wildlife out this way. You got moose, caribou, deer. I think it's black-tailed deer down here.
Yeah.
And outside of some logging and a little bit of roads and all that other kind of stuff, the one thing I have realized during listening to all these nature documentaries and these Bigfoot expeditions they got out here is that it's hard seeing 20 feet in front of your face in a lot of areas just because of the underbrush, all of the extra foliage running around, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's dense. And with a lot of rivers and inlets and bays and all that kind of stuff, it's definitely a fisherman's paradise, I would say.
Sure.
Hunter's paradise too, if you don't mind getting wet. But with that, the big thing that we need to really talk about as far as the ecosystem that I find to be important to the conversation here is that the salmon runs, right? This is a huge food source for any predator and some omnivores in the ecosystem, right? Like, the sheer amount of calories that the salmon runs provide is insane. Like, to the point where I think we talked about it last episode. Brown bears that eat off these salmon runs are 25% bigger than their cousins that don't.
Yeah.
It's stupid. I surmise that the one that they got on Joe Rogan's one that eats salmon pretty regularly, like that is a big brown bear. You know what I mean? Like, that being said, when we were talking about how this could proportionally relate to Sasquatch, is like, it seems as though a lot of the reports given in Alaska range well within the double-digit height category compared to
Yeah.
regular contiguous United States. Which, to be fair, if this is all talking about a real species here, would follow Bergman's rule, wherein cousins of a southernmost like related species are smaller than their northernmost cousins.
Yes, we talked about this in our last episode. For those who aren't familiar with Birdman's rule or didn't listen to our last episode, basically part of the reasons why this happens is because further north there is a greater need to retain heat. So in doing so, they become larger, and more often than not, this is also because the food supplies in these areas are also much larger as well. So they also have enough like to sustain the dietary needs they need at that size. Basically, what
And
we're saying,
heat's
shit's big up
critical.
north.
Definitely. Like, moose is insane. Like, I still can't get over how big moose are, and I've seen Clydesdale horses.
Yeah.
Like, oh my goodness. So, the other thing that kind of seems a little bit more frequent in this area when it comes to Bigfoot reports are alleged aggressive encounters, disappearances, that kind of stuff. So, to kind of set the mood into, before we get into the main meat and potatoes that is Portlock itself, I kind of wanted to set the mood with a report given in a Small Town Monsters documentary. Now, this report is by a Jonathan Dur, okay, who is the best friend of the father that is in this story. Okay?
Yes.
So, they talk about the disappearance of a Billy Pope at 16 years old. It's an unreported disappearance case, which happened south of the Denali National Park, which kind of puts it in the purview of southern coastal Alaska for our purposes here.
Yeah.
And this kid regularly makes 3-hour walks back and forth to a love interest's house in a town over. Okay? Like, it's not unknown for youth up there to kind of walk around or take bikes or whatever and take a long distance to get to the next settlement. It's just kind of the way of life up there, I guess. And the parents of the love interest called his parents to let them know that, hey, Billy's on his way back home, right? He'll be home in around 3 hours. I think at that point, I could be wrong. They were saying around 4 o'clock. Now, at that point, 6 o'clock rolls around, or 5 o'clock rolls around, 6 o'clock rolls around, something's going wrong. They're calling everybody. And they get a search party going back up the trail to try and see what's going on, okay? Because it's a pretty straight shooting trail, I guess, to go. You don't have to divert too much in order to get to the next town. So they end up finding his trail, and it leads to a tree that is surrounded by nothing. Like, it's in the middle of a in the middle of a open area. There's trees kind of around it. Now, what is odd for everybody involved is that apparently 3, 4, maybe 5 o'clock in the afternoon, which in this time of year, it's bright outside. This guy's building a fire, right? The sun's going down maybe a little bit, but he's building a fire out, like, in the middle of this, like, thing out in the distance. And now there was his tracks going into this makeshift campsite, and according to the people that went and searched for him, they also found alleged Bigfoot tracks around this campsite. And Billy was never seen again. Now, the guy that's given this interview was saying, like, well, honestly, like, everybody kind of decided we're not going to talk about it because, like, we know what happened. There's not much we can do about it now. Like, to be fair, I believe the Pope family at that point had 8 or 9 members in it, brothers and sisters alike. There was quite a few people in this family anyway. Not to say that that makes it any less tragic, but maybe they got a lot of other stuff going on. There's a lot that you got to do in surviving Alaska versus a lot of other places in the U.S. And I can't imagine feeding more than 1 or 2 people besides myself would be quite a Herculean task. So they decided not to report it. I did verify that, like, in the missing persons database for Alaska, like, this kid does not pop up. And the main reason why they said that, you know, we're going to mourn, we're going to move on, there's not much we can do about it, is because, A, they did not want all that attention spread over the family. However, like, as years go by and everything, they've had their time to grieve, and, like, the father is kind of cool, not telling that story himself personally, but letting his best friend, who was there as well during the track to go find him, tell the story.
Okay.
So, what they also note, and this is something that I did see in other Bigfoot researcher interviews, is that there seems to be a weirder stigma in Alaska for Bigfoot than others.
Is that
because,
so?
Like, yes, because, like, you know, over here it's kind of a niche activity, right?
Right.
It's not so much a niche activity in Alaska, but there seems to be 2 camps, and the people that don't believe in Bigfoot really don't try to socialize. So, like, unless you know that it's cool to talk with people that believe in Bigfoot up there, you're kind of risking your social, like, your status a little bit more as being outed as a crazy.
It's basically the way it was for the rest of the U.S. about, like, 15, 20, I'd say 10 to 15 years ago.
Which, I mean, makes plenty of sense. Like, everything about that place is just a world away from what we understand.
Yeah, exactly. So the social attitude would probably take a longer time to come around to where we are now here in the rest of the U.S., where it's a topic that people legitimately discuss and doesn't immediately mark you as a wackadoo nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Now, like, something that does bother me as curious is, like, I almost feel like the father would be a little less nonchalant about the idea of Bigfoot taking his kids when he's got such a big family to protect out there.
Yeah.
However, it did. I think they went into like the family did definitely have had rough times since as well. Now, like, I don't believe they're all Bigfoot related. I think that was the only Bigfoot related incident that family had actually had occur to them. Now, like, the only real evidence they point to in the story about it being a Bigfoot potentially is the tracks surrounding the camp. Now, like, one thing I've noticed too is, like, when you're looking at bear tracks, like, there's 2 different kinds that you can kind of get, like, especially like the front paw is a very distinct track, you know what I mean? But by the way they walk, they kind of walk in on themselves a little bit with their footprints. Like, the back set will kind of walk into the front set a little bit. So, I'm not entirely sure without photographic evidence or some sort of plaster cast or something like that. Like, if it's not within the right size category of, like, 16 to 20 inches in length, then I almost kind of feel like it could easily just have been a bear attack just the same. Especially if he's building a fire, you know. Fire is something that they don't like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But at the same time, boy was not found whatsoever. Completely disappeared. They never found the scatterings of an animal attack.
Yeah.
Which, if it was a bear, they generally eat you on the spot. And it ain't pretty. And, like, wolves, I think cats tend to be the ones that like to carry their prey off the most. But a lynx is going to mess you up, but it's like It's like twice the size of a bobcat. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It ain't like you're getting attacked by a mountain lion. And not mind, it's a whole shitload of mean though. Like he's not nice. But with that, with the mood kind of set,
Yes.
let's get into it. Okay, Kaz, do you want to kind of set the tone for the legends of Portlock?
Yeah. So, Portlock, Alaska, which was historically a fishing town in the region. It had a very big, I think it was a big cannery there, if I remember right.
Yes, it was a cannery.
There was a very big cannery there. Um, and as far as settlements in Alaska go, this was a flourishing one. It grew at a rapid rate. It had a post office. It had a school. Tons of local tons of small businesses were popping up there, all centered around this cannery. And at the rate it was growing, it was likely going to become a major city in Alaska. However, there were a couple things that were going on in the region. For one, a lot of people were going missing in the area, and then their bodies would turn up way later in the rivers around the settlement. Two, um, the cannery burned down. They rebuilt it, but it scared the fuck out of everybody when it happened. And then it burned down again. And did they rebuild it after that? I think it burned. The second time it burned down, that was when everybody said we're done here.
I think so. I think the second fire was definitely enough.
Meanwhile, these mysterious deaths are continuing and happening more frequently and freaking the hell out of everybody. And with the central economic pillar of the settlement gone, people started leaving. And eventually, Portlock, Alaska was abandoned. But why? Well, there's legends in the area about a creature known as the Nantinak. Nantinak? What's the
Yeah, I think it's here there, Nantinak.
I believe they pronounce it Nantinak. It is a Bigfoot-like creature that is known to be in the area. Um, Now, oral histories of it attribute it for the most part. Its physical characteristics are akin to that of a traditional North American Sasquatch. It was typically described as about 8 feet tall, being covered in sharp, dark fur. It had sharp claws capable of ripping mammals. However, but it gets in more interesting there because it also had a lot of supernatural aspects to it as well. It could cause illnesses, odors, and even like project sounds, if I remember correctly. And I don't mean just like howling. I mean like it can make like noises.
You're talking like mimicry?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Now, like, I believe they did try a few times afterwards to also send expeditions to try to colonize Portlock.
There have been quite a few expeditions that have gone back to try and start new settlements there, and every single time they seem to run into problems. More oddly enough, one of the ones that seems to come up the most is that they can never pull up any fish there, despite the fact that this is part of a region for Alaska that is known for having plenty of salmon.
Yeah, that's the weirdest thing to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think when we were watching, what was that, Expedition Bigfoot? Or like,
It was called Alaskan Killer Bigfoot. It was a show that we all like, because I have Discovery Plus, and the main reason I have Discovery Plus is so I can watch MythBusters and Guys Grocery Games, and also at the time Fortune to Fire before they took it off. Every now and again,
that's a shame.
Yeah, I know. Now it's on like the history website, and most of it's up on there for free. I'm a little agitated because like I paid for this service to get this, but whatever. They still have all of MythBusters and Guys Grocery Games, so I'm like, all right. So, anyways, every now and again, I kind of peruse through their selection to see if there's anything worth noting. One of the things I've watched is there's a show they have about Skinwalker Ranch, and that was pretty fascinating, and we all watched that. And then I saw this show called Alaskan Killer Bigfoot, and this immediately turned me and Jaster's heads because, well, one, Bigfoot and death in the same sentence will always kind of arouse the attention of an amateur Bigfoot researcher like us. And this was the first time we were ever introduced to the Nantinaq. Now, unfortunately, it's a lot of reality TV. It's a lot of reality TV hosiery. Unfortunately, the sad truth is a lot of it's fake. But they did find a lot of genuinely weird bullshit out there, and there was at least one instance where we think they actually had something happen. But the rest of it was mostly hoo-ha. It's still a very entertaining show, and I highly recommend watching it. Bigfoot enthusiasts or no. But
I think they caught on to a topic that was actually more interesting than what they went out to go look for. A little bit.
Yeah, which would be...
So they found that obelisk, right?
Yes! Yeah.
Is that what you're thinking about?
Yeah, there's a marker of a land claim that I think, was it Spaniards?
Yeah, I think it was originally Spanish, and there were a lot of legends about how the locals in the area reacted very poorly to said land claim and cursed the land. And there's some people that theorize that that's why you can't pull fish out of it anymore. They have a lot of people thinking that that's the creation of the Nantinaq itself came from that, or just any combination of unfortunate events that may befall somebody in that area. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because I distinctly remember when they went back and tried to dig up any historical evidence. There was a record of some French explorers that came. They landed ashore for the rest, and I think a lot of them came down with a sickness, and they decided to leave after that.
I think you're right. So that original land claim still stood. Like, technically speaking, I guess. But and we'll get into more paranormal, spectral, bad mojo stuff in other episodes, especially when Devin gets to come on, because that's a whole other ball game.
Mm-hmm.
I can't wait.
I've been waiting forever for the ghost episode that Devin wants to talk about. I want to know what he wants to bring to the table.
Yeah, right. Because I feel like
I will fully admit my interest in ghosts has waned over the years. Every now and again I'll see something that's pretty compelling, but as editing technology gets more advanced, it's becoming easier and easier to fake ghost encounters.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And unfortunately, there is a cottage industry of shows about douchebags looking for ghosts.
They're hilarious, though.
They're hilarious, and they're a lot of fun to watch, but they're not great in the research department because a lot of it is for the spectacle of it. I guarantee. Yeah. In fact, quite truthfully, my favorite show in this genre is actually the BuzzFeed Unsolved investigations, because the fact of the matter is they go out there and nothing happens.
I just remember one of those. I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was just this guy just basically sitting there in a dark room all night insulting a ghost.
That's Ghost Adventures. That's definitely Ghost Adventures. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I love that. You would imagine, I wonder if that guy's if he's haunted now. You know?
Zach Bagans claims he is extremely haunted and has a lot of demons following him around. So, need some sources cited on that, bud. But this is a guy who claims he gets possessed by a demon every time he goes on an investigation. So I don't really I don't really trust his claims.
Yeah.
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 I've always been leery of those that claim that they've been possessed. You know, that's like a mark of value, like a mark of honor almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
However, Kaiden came up with some stuff here on the whole Portlock incident, because people have done a ton of expeditions out there looking for stuff, and I've heard a lot of odd audio, knocks, all that kind of stuff. There's even been scant images, a lot of blob squatches, but Kine's got something that I think is an interesting addition to the Portlock conversation. So you want to take that away whenever you're ready?
Yeah, the main thing is, from what I found, is like an individual actually went and interviewed or talked to a woman from Nonwalik that actually, had relatives from Portlock.
Mm-hmm.
And according to her, like, all the things about, like, there being a killer Bigfoot in the area was all made up. It was all like one of their I think it was like one of their elders. Um, like they do actually have a legend of something out there. Which is pronounced Nantinuk apparently.
So we had it wrong.
Nantinuk.
Nantinuk. Okay. Yeah, I was like, I was pretty sure I wasn't pronouncing it right, which is why I asked.
Yeah, I just pulled it up and I just found it right here. It's just Nantinuk, but they have this, these legends of this thing being in the area, and reporters would keep asking him about it, and they got irritated. So this one elder just started making stuff up, and they think that, speculate that part of why the elder made these stories up was to try to scare people away from the area, because it's still a place that held a lot of significant cultural background, like significance to them, and they were slowly losing it because they've been away there for like 50 years at the time, so there's not a lot of people left that speak their native language. But yeah, they say that like there is they say that there is something out there. The person they interviewed was a person named Sally Ash. She said that like according to some of their stories, it was someone that actually used to live in their community with them, but then just decided he didn't want to be around people anymore, so moved off into the woods, and then started growing really hairy and all that stuff, and the rest is history, really, as some would say. But yeah, the reason she gave as to why Portlock was actually abandoned was more practical rather than supernatural. It's like there weren't any killings or anything like that. People weren't scared away. It actually was the Alaskan Highway Route 1. When that thing was completed, it offered better opportunities in other towns. And so people started migrating out, looking for, better opportunities.
So it slowly started to kill the town.
Yeah, it slowly started to, bleed the town out and everything. And finally, the post office closed down, and, that was pretty much it. Because I think they were like the last ones to go at that point. But I actually have heard, just like kind of looking at it a little bit, there is a little thing where they were thinking of trying to reestablish a village out there. Don't know if they're going to go through with that or not, but we shall see. But so yeah, it was like there are legends of something being out there, but it's definitely not a killer. It just, most people just err on the side of caution and say don't bother it, and don't go out on a foggy day.
Which seems to be kind of bog standard for a lot of either hairy man or Bigfoot-like legends in Native American tradition.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me how many of them talk about how a man decided, you know what, I'm returned to monkey, and he literally did.
I personally, now that I'm more familiar with the history of Portlock, stuff like that, just from not only watching the Alaskan Killer Bigfoot, but also reading, other extraneous materials and research in the era, I really believe that Portlock was just abandoned for economic reasons. It's got to be really expensive to rebuild a cannery, right? And then to have it burned down again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're almost done.
I would also toss in the towel at that point.
Yeah. Well, then also, too, like I said, with the route opening up, more traffic's going to these other places. And,
yeah.
I mean, your place is kind of remote to get to anyway, so yeah. I mean,
So, the thing that I kind of wanted to bring up, and we kind of bring this up a few times. I don't know how much we brought it up in the past, but like when we talk about it off camera, we bring it up kind of often. Is that this kind of stuff's an important thing to suss out
Yes.
whenever it comes to researching the topic, researching the phenomenon, the possibility. Because at the end of the day, there might be people out there that are legitimately seeing somebody or something or whatever out in the woods. But for every one of those, there's also somebody out there trying to make a dollar off of it or try to scare somebody away in some sort of Scooby-Doo plot. And that muddies the water for any actual conversation to move forward. It gives a bad stigma to the whole conversation. It makes it hard for legitimate science to come to the table or want to risk their career on even discussing the topic.
And this is in a field that is already struggling to be recognized as legitimate to begin with.
Because that doesn't even begin to really start to look at what goes on our side of the fence. Because, like, there are people out there that do Bigfoot hunts, which I think are goofy as hell. Like, why pay somebody money to go out there and do something you can go do for free? You know what I mean? But also, like, I think the whole premise is kind of scummy, and whenever somebody who's skeptic or on the fence about it starts to look into the topic, they start seeing this kind of stuff, suddenly the whole thing starts to look like a scam.
Confirmation bias kicks in.
And that can happen on both sides of the fence sometimes, too.
Yes. There are a lot of believers who are very bad about it.
And no, that wouldn't be any better herd of people to take advantage of for money to go out on a Bigfoot hunt than a bunch of people that want to go out there and look for a Bigfoot and have, like, some money to spend. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, when it comes to all of that, it is important for the Bigfoot community to kind of come together to kind of suss out this kind of behavior and call that stuff out when it is seen, when it is reported, when it is proven. Now, this is also, like we said, one person's account, but at the same time, I think that this overall adds a lot of context to the conversation because I don't think this person's lying either.
I have to say, if we're talking about Portlock, also known as Port Chatham, I highly recommend reading Larry Baxter's book on it called Abandoned, The History and Horror of Port Chatham, Alaska. Yes, it goes into the Nantinnuk, aka the hairy man of Port Chatham, but it offers a lot of historical and economical perspectives on it, and I personally believe his investigation is kind of the definitive, like, this is what happened on it.
A little bit more on this guy that I've seen some more of his work. Like, the guy's actually a ex police officer, retired.
Yeah.
Wasn't like, so that's another thing, like, not to throw any mud on David Paulides, but like there's a little bit more to that story, but this guy's just straight up simply retired.
Oh wait, this is Beans. We were just talking about him last episode. He wrote
exactly.
Okay, hey, what do you know? Beans comes back. He also has another book called Squatch Cop, investigating and documenting the Bigfoot phenomenon.
What is nice, though, I've seen him do this kind of stuff, is like because he has ties to police offices, right? And he's got ties to all that kind of stuff. He still has police grade forensic equipment. So, like, when he gets a handprint or something to that effect, he can actually lift fingerprints.
Absolutely.
And see if that's a human or what. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And he's found prints that people thought were Bigfoot turned out to be human.
Yeah.
So, like,
erosion can do a lot to footprints. I know one of the most common cases of misidentification of footprints is that people will be like, oh, I found a Bigfoot. I found a Squatch print. And then, people will look at it and it's actually, no, this is just the footprint of somebody else that's been eroded by, weather or, the river that this is by, or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm. That's what made the metal detecting in Alaska footprints so interesting to me. Especially like in that video where you saw it on that bike trail. It was such a clearly defined print.
Yeah.
Like there was not much erosion going on at all with that. Like you could see the freaking toes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like nuts levels of clarity with that. And like you said, there's plenty of issues when it comes to documenting a lot of different things, let alone footprints, So, with that, we wanted to make sure that we got our opinions out there because, like, this kind of stuff, this muddying of the waters, is inherently damaging to the conversation and anybody that wants to see an end to it. Because, like, we often talk about how with the Bigfoot phenomenon, the only thing that anybody's going to accept is a dead body on a fucking skid. You know what I mean? And we were talking about this last night. Like, let's say hypothetically, you had a big cat track, right?
Yeah.
And it's clearly different than any other big cat that's in the area. Say it's like twice as big, okay? And there's multiple sets of them. Science would at least be like, there seems to be something going on here. You know what I mean? What makes this so much different? And I think a lot of it has to do with the muddying of the water. Like people throwing their hands in, calling it a hoax, admitting to hoaxing. Like, we see a lot of the same kind of stuff come from the UFO community. And it's good to see the UFO community getting some validation recently with all of the U.S. Congress hearings and all that kind of stuff. And maybe someday we'll get some elaboration from the U.S. government upon this kind of topic. But until then, we gotta go off of what we got. Now, with that, Kaz has gotten some good stuff from this area known as Thomas Bay.
Yes.
I was going to let him get into this shit.
First off, shout out to BigfootEncounters.com, which is a very rich deposit of stuff, though it's been abandoned for at least 10 to 12 years now, and unfortunately some of these links are going dead. I was very upset because I found an account while I was researching for our next episode, the Northern Alaska episode, that I was really disappointed that I couldn't find information on, so I'm going to have to look elsewhere or email the webmaster or something like that. Anyways.
Have you tried Wayback Machine?
I might try that, yeah. So
that would probably be a good one. I think I might need to do that too for my side of the investigation.
So this takes place in Thomas Bay, Alaska. So before we even get into the story itself, Thomas Bay is known as the Bay of Death due to a massive landslide that happened there in 1750. It's also known as Devil's Country.
Which is always fun.
Yes.
You want your backyard to get named that every time. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
Exactly. So the story goes there were some broke prospectors who were camping in a shack in Wrangell, Alaska, which is actually not too far from Portlock, if you look on the map. This one guy comes in, and he tells them about how he had gotten some information about an Alaskan native about an area to go mine for gold. He says he was told to go up Thomas Bay, camp on Patterson River, travel upriver for over 8 miles, turn to the high mountains, and after traveling a mile and a half, he would find a lake shaped like a half moon. So this individual, who in the record is called Charlie, goes to check out the story of the gold that was found there. Now, this was in May 1900. He loaded up his canoe with supplies, and he left. When he came back a month later, he arrived without a coat or his hat, and the only thing in his canoe, aside from his oars, was a large piece of quartz with a lot of gold in it. Now,
mission accomplished?
Mission accomplished, but it was a very harrowing story. So, I have a actual reprinting of the account as it was written, not just the summarized version on the Wikipedia article. So I'm going to skip through the part where he talks about the horrible weather he faced. There's one thing there are a couple details I do want to mention, though. He called it dead country. There doesn't seem to be any life in there at all. You might spend all day in the timber without seeing a squirrel.
Which, that's odd.
It's very odd. I'm getting at the point where I'm also realizing I need to eat some dinner. A lot of saliva is showing up in my mouth, and I'm trying to keep it down by hydrating, and it's not working out too well.
I understand.
And I'm like, God damn it, I need to talk. So
I
pardon
had to
me.
sneak a sandwich.
He managed to find some exposed quartz, and he gets a big chunk of it. So he goes back to, so he begins turning to go back to his camp. I'm gonna read the rest of the account from here onward. I turned half around to get back to sight some mountain peaks, and lying below me on the other side of the ridge from the ledge was the Half Moon Lake the Indian had told me about. Right there, fellows, I got the scare of my life. I hope to God I never see or go through the likes of it again. Swarming up the ridge toward me from the lake were the most hideous creatures. I couldn't call them anything but devils, as they were neither men nor monkeys, yet looked like both. They were entirely sexless, their bodies covered with long coarse hair except for the scabs and running sores that had replaced it. Each one seemed to be reaching out for me and striving to be the first to get me. The air was full of their cries, and the stench from their sores and bodies made me faint. I forgot my broken gun and tried to use it on the first ones. Then I threw it at them and turned and ran. God, how did I run? I could feel their hot breath on my back. Their long claw-like fingers scraped my back. The smell from their steaming, stinking bodies was making me sick. While the noise they made, yelling, screaming, and breathing, drove me mad. Reason left me. How I reached the canoe or how I hung on to that piece of quartz is a mystery to me. When I came to, it was night, and I was lying in the bottom of my canoe, drifting between Thomas Bay and Sequoia Island, cold, hungry, and crazy for a drink of water. But only to satisfy the latter urge, I started for Wrangell, and here I am. You no doubt think I am either crazy or lying. All I can say, there's the quartz. Never let me hear the name of Thomas Bay again, and for God's sake, help me get away tomorrow on that boat. Now, the reason he mentions the boat is because after Charlie came back, he was very distant and quiet for a couple days, and they finally asked him what had happened, and he told them only because these people were his prospecting partners, and he said he got a ticket for the nearest first boat back to Seattle. So he said he went through a lot of physical and mental anguish.
Jesus. Now,
that... It is known as the strangest story ever.
What would you call that cryptid?
Well, in the region, they're called devilmen. Or devil creatures, monkeys. Rather.
So we're talking something different than the Nahani phenomenon.
Now, Charlie, our... said he had scratches on his back, and these things are about 4 feet tall and have claw-like fingers. It's also apparently encounters with these creatures seem to cause people to go into hysterics and are usually deemed temporarily insane. There is a note about a trapper reporting losing a dog in the hills around Thomas Bay and finding strange tracks behind feet resembling a cross between a bear's and a human's footprints. Trapper returned later to find the traps he'd hastily left. Some were sprung, some were not, some were destroyed. He set out to try to find his dog and was never seen again. Now, the daughter of the individual who transcribed this account, Harry Culp, his daughter Virginia, got interviewed in Petersburg, Alaska. She had helped her father in the production of the story and was extremely familiar with it. She believed in the veracity of her father's narrative with regard to how he saw and lived it. She said she could not and would not say whether her father's story was true, false, or some sort of mental aberration. She expressed confidence in her father's abilities and truthfulness. So, there you go.
Yikes.
Yes.
That is something completely wild to me.
My question is though about the Charlie guy. It's like, If they were so close on his back that he had scratches on his back from where they were clawing at him, how did he get away?
Did he like dive into the canoe? Is that how
But
he
even
made
My
it? Got
best
it out there?
assumption is he ran like hell with the quartz in hand and dove into a canoe and managed to get away and then passed out from stress and exhaustion.
but the canoe would either have to be tied up or it'd have to be on land for it to not drift away.
Or
So
at
in
least
other words,
partially. I would
yeah,
say like
at least partially, but it's like it's not going to be in water enough that diving into it would shift it back out to the water. I don't think.
Who knows, man?
Um,
People are capable of extraordinary things when they're under duress. Uh, I can't. Unfortunately, this is one we can't really interrogate very closely because This is a secondhand written account from 1900. This isn't.
yeah,
Uh, so unfortunately, everything we have to go off of is in the story itself.
right.
now mind, I believe the area does have Bigfoot reports associated with it. I could be wrong with that, but I'm pretty sure I'd seen something. But it's definitely an interesting account. Like I always love to see something with different kind of cryptids going on. Like it seems like the Northern Reaches definitely has their fair share of problems when it comes to that kind of shit. Now, the other thing I kind of wanted to get into before we cut this one going is a report out of the Kenai Peninsula. And now you can find this one at the BFRO. This is report number 1261, which is a Class A reporting. So, this talks about a man who was fishing with a friend in Prince William Sound, which is a bay in Alaska, in southeastern Alaska.
Hmm.
Now, one of his companions took a small boat up a river to check on the state of the salmon run. Okay, he goes, as the day wore on towards the evening, friend didn't come back at the expected time, so he scanned upriver and across the adjacent land with binoculars. And when he was scanning the adjacent land, he saw a Sasquatch walking across the tundra, and apparently the dark hair like flowing from its shoulders bounced like a cape with each step's kind of what the guy said. He said the Sasquatch paid no attention to the boat, which was a distance of about 1,000 feet away, which is about 300 yards. So, there was another witness on a commercial boat at anchor at the mouth of one of the rivers at the bay that apparently also witnessed the creature. Now, what is interesting to me is less so the account, but more so the follow-up investigation by the investigator, a Dr. Wolf Fehrenbach. Now,
Yeah.
this guy, the guy that actually submitted the report was a commercial fisherman, but he was also a former Air Force mechanic and veteran. Now, according to this man, the area was known for its concentration of berries and black bears, and the salmon run was kind of in its early stage, so that's why his friend went up there to go check it to see where it was at, because it's kind of early still in the year for it. Now, the people that seen this creature had it with, they were like, okay, this is not a bear, okay? Now, they did have binoculars to sight the creature with. I don't know about video or anything like that. So, what the guy did say is that this is interesting because there's not many accounts of Bigfoot kind of north of this boundary that Prince William Sound lies on. Is that when it comes to reports that at least he gets, because he's no doubt one of the only people doing investigations in Alaska, you know what I mean, for the BFRO, because they do try to vet their investigators and all that other kind of stuff, that there seems to be a small cluster in the Prince of Wales Island, in the Coves, the Wrangler Narrows, but they're all around the vicinity of 56 degrees north by latitude. And everything else farther north is really scattered. And that is something that we're going to kind of get into in the next episode. Because when it comes down to it, the amount of people in those areas of Alaska, in the northern reaches, is so sparse.
Okay, alright, so I'm doing some additional reading, and there are some accounts that attribute Charlie's encounter to the Kushtaka. Or Kushtaka.
Okay. Yeah, that is a word that they use up there for them.
So, and in the folklore of the Kushtaka, or Kushtuk, pardon my white man tongue, that's a shapeshifter, and it's typically depicted as some kind of, like, water creature.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because usually it's like, it's translated and literally means land otter man. So.
Yeah, and a lot of people do have a feeling that would kind of describe a Sasquatch-like creature just the same. And there's a lot of people that believe that they fish actively. There's been sightings of them swimming. Now, like, the other thing that goes into this report that I kind of find interesting is that the running theory amongst researchers up there is that they follow a similar migration route from the north to the south from up on high to down low, you know what I mean? Depending on the seasons. And a lot of the time, when it comes down to it, the overall seasonal migration of these creatures would also kind of lend to why they only get seen in certain times of the year.
Yeah.
And it would also kind of help their survival, because a lot of these creatures do the same thing up in that area. And like because the other running theory is that there might be some amount of hibernation involved.
Yeah.
Which sounds nuts, but there are creatures native to Alaska, like squirrels and frogs and all that kind of stuff, that have evolved their own independent forms of either from partial to full-on hibernation. Like, one of the ones I found craziest is just this, like, the wood frog.
Yeah.
Its blood is made in such a way, and like all of its body and all of its molecules and cells are made in such a way that when it freezes, when it goes underground, it doesn't die. It freezes. It's like freaking cryostasis, basically. Yeah. And then whenever it thaws out, and all of its like cells and all that stuff can start touching again and everything, it starts to reactivate itself.
Yeah.
So like up there, like, yeah, they got frogs. Could have fooled me. Like, I was watching hours and hours of people being out there in the middle of the wilderness, and I ain't heard no one frog. But then again, life finds a way. It's one of the craziest things I've ever seen. Like, apparently bears, some species up there, they actually give birth in hibernative state.
What?
Yeah. And like, so they give birth in a hibernative state, okay? And so the cubs are able to nuzzle up to the mom for warmth and all that through the winter because they're in a cave or some shit, right?
Yeah.
And they're able to feed as they need to, right?
Yeah.
Now, the mother will periodically wake up throughout the winter, but it's not like she's getting up and moving around much, you know what I mean? It's mostly just to make sure things aren't shitty and then going back to bed.
Yeah.
But, like, there are some wild things going on in the biology of Alaska in order to survive this wild climate that they have up there. And, like, given the reason if that's how every species up there they've seen has acted and worked, like, it would stand to reason that any other creature within its purview would be subject to its same laws.
Yeah.
So, there are a lot of interesting questions. And, like, the frustrating thing is just the lack of people up there to find those answers.
Absolutely.
Who knows? Once we do the LBL thing, if we really make it big, let's go to Alaska.
Yeah, there you go.
I'd do it. I would do it. All right, but with that, I think unless you guys have anything else you want to add,
No, not really.
not a problem. All right, guys, so that wraps up this episode of Bigfoot Geography. If you liked this episode or got to the end of it, please like, comment, subscribe. That all helps a small channel like us. However, our next thing is that after this next episode concludes, we're going to need to know where to go next. Either Canada or America is kind of where we were thinking for this series. So if you've got a spot that you want us to cover in Bigfoot Geography, just post it in the comments below and we'll get to it.
Yep.
Thank you all, and you guys have a wonderful night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.